Hi, Harrison here, and we are still in Bath Place Music, and I'm with Darcey.
Hi.
Thank you so much for letting us take over half of your shop for the day.
That's alright, that's alright.
We've wanted to do a video about action and intonation and setup on guitars for ages, because it makes a huge difference as to how easy a guitar is to play and how good it sounds, regardless of how much money you've spent.
Absolutely.
And you're the expert on this because you do it every day.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, all guitars, as you've just said, all guitars have the ability to play and sound nice, irrespective of their cost. However, one of the key factors is how they feel to play. So if you, for example, go to Amazon, for example, and bought the cheapest guitar you possibly could for your child to learn to play on, if that guitar's not set up correctly, it's going to be painful to play. And it's essentially going to put them off from learning to play the guitar, and they'll think that they don't have the ability to do it. Whereas if they have a passion for it and they enjoy music, I think nearly everybody has the ability to play a musical instrument, particularly the guitar. So action and intonation and all that is very, very important, but particularly the action, the feel of the guitar, because there is a lot of tension on your fingers when you're playing an instrument, and the calluses on the tips of the fingers are always very soft when you start off with playing. So and that does eventually harden up over a period of time. However, if the guitar's not set up correctly, then you are going to have problems.
So let's go into that, because we've both mentioned action a couple of times, and for anyone that's not familiar, by action we're talking about the distance between the string and the fret.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
And that's a personal thing. I have mine slightly higher than I used to. Other people have got a really light touch. But if it gets too high, like you say, it gets hard to play. So you've got a number of areas of the guitar that are adjustable.
Yes.
Which is what you spend a huge
That's
amount
what
of time
we do
doing.
here. Yeah, absolutely.
Talk us through the bits that wear out, or the bits that you can adjust to change the action.
Okay. Well, if I was to show you, for example, on the Ibanez I have here at the moment, there are a couple of factors that create either a high action or a low action on a guitar. One thing being the bridge, because, for example, on this one the bridge is adjustable in height, and on the guitar that Harrison has here, we can adjust the bridge height and we can adjust the saddle heights as well. That's one factor. But what you do down here on the guitar, in terms of physics, is small movements on here don't make a dramatic difference to the guitar. So you have to make quite large movements. However, if a guitar has a very high action, and again, as Harrison said, we're talking about the height of the strings, so what we would normally do is make an adjustment to the necks. Now, nearly all guitar necks have a steel rod down the centre of the neck with an adjuster. It may be this end, it may be that end, or on an acoustic guitar it'll be hidden inside the sound hole. Now, what we're looking to get the ultimate playing action on the guitar is to get this neck as straight as possible. Now, the reason why we have a steel rod is the amount of tension on the string, which I think is about 26 pounds, and about 13 kilos of tension on there. Now, being the neck is so thin, that tension is going to naturally pull the neck forward. So the steel rod is there to compensate for that. So what we're looking at getting on your guitar is as flat as possible on the fretboard, but not too flat that it buzzes all the way up through as you're playing the notes. Now, if you buy a guitar and it's got an excessively high action, in most cases it's because the steel rod is not adjusted, or they may have adjusted it in the factory, but because of the climate in China, for example, it's come over on the boats or in a plane, comes over to our climate, the climate's very different, and being these are made of wood, and obviously wood does move, it contracts and expands, you may find that it will be slightly out. So we can't say that every guitar that comes in from a factory abroad has a perfectly good playing action straight out of the box. That's why it's important when you buy a new guitar from a shop, for example, that is actually checked before you take it away.
And I think the important thing to say as well is you had my guitar last week to deal with the action on it, because guitars just move over time as you're using them.
Yeah.
If it's been an old guitar that's been in the attic or the garage or something for the last 30 years, which I see as a teacher from time to time,
yes,
that comes straight to you. Like you say, particularly sort of inexpensive first guitars don't always come with playable action.
No, absolutely. A note on the attic thing. Most of you will be aware that in your attic the temperature changes are quite dramatic. So it can be excessively hot in the summer and excessively cold in the winter, and even during this time of the year, it can get fairly warm in the loft, but suddenly the temperature will plummet. That's not good for guitars. So if you've got or know that somebody's got a guitar in their attic, get it out of there as soon as you can and keep it somewhere where the temperature is fairly constant.
Yeah.
Because I see it a lot. So people say, "Oh, I want to learn to play guitar. This is my granddad's guitar. It came out of the attic," and they bring it in, and in some cases it's almost impossible to put the guitar right because the wood has actually warped and contracted and moved in various ways, and they're just not playable. And you've seen it, I'm sure, many times over the years as a teacher.
Kept next to the
I've seen it
fire
loads
and
of times.
next to the radiator and in the
Radiators,
conservatory and
necks,
stuff.
yeah, absolutely.
And as I say, this is something that you're talking about, fairly small measurements, and I've been playing guitar for 20 years, but you still set up mine because you're doing it every day and you know how those guitars should feel. And also, even on really nice quality guitars, stuff wears out if you're using them every day.
Absolutely.
Nuts and pots and things. So you do amp repairs. All of this action stuff goes for acoustics as well as electrics.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're changing string gauges, if you suddenly try and put really heavy strings on, particularly something with a movable bridge like a Strat, then that's a job for a professional and somebody.
Yeah, I mean, as Harrison says, it's a good idea that when you take your guitar, or you say if you bring your guitar into me and you have one of our spa services done, and you have new strings put on, we set the guitar up to those specific strings, not necessarily the manufacturer, but the gauge of strings. So it's very important that if you change your strings or you get somebody to change them for you, it's important to know what gauge strings you had on the guitar previously, because just going from a 9 to a 10 gauge, for example, on the Strat here, or even on this Ibanez, will, if anything, it will pull the tremolo up like that, and even though it's not a great deal, it will bring the strings away from the fretboard and potentially make the guitar more difficult to play. And the same goes with acoustic guitars. If you've got extra light strings on it, for example, because you like bending, and then you decide you want heavier strings because you want to put a bit more power into it, you will have to have the neck adjusted to compensate for that extra tension on there.
And string gauge as an action and how a guitar feels is a really personal thing that might change over as you play.
Yeah, absolutely. Back in the sort of there was this thing around the sort of 70s, early 80s where all electric guitarists and acoustic guitars, they were all out to challenge themselves to get the lowest possible playing action on a guitar. And I've seen some Fenders from the 70s with ridiculously low actions on them, and they play wonderfully, but the feeling is not there. So there is an infinite height that strings should be set at on electric guitars and acoustic guitars as well.
And experimenting and playing other people's guitars, and just my Strat came to you last week for heavier strings.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with it before, although I was putting them on late at night and quickly because I was working, my bridge was coming further up and I thought this is going to Darcey. But it's a personal thing, and I wasn't changing it because there was anything wrong with it. It was just to try something different and to make the guitar feel different.
Yeah.
Talk us briefly then through intonation, which is another term that people hear and don't fully understand.
Indeed. Right. Okay. Intonation. The basic measurement for intonation is a measurement taken from the nut to the 12th fret, and then from the 12th fret to the saddle. Now, as a starting point, those two measurements have to match. Okay, it varies, as you can see. These are not all the same in the same position, and you think, well, why? Well, because the string gauges get progressively thicker as they go down, so you have to compensate for that. But the most important thing with intonation is if the intonation is badly out on a guitar, when you play a chord down here and then you suddenly play a bridge version up here, it's going to sound a mile out. And of course, when you're soloing as well, you go for that big note, and it's just not quite in pitch with the rest of the band or the recording that you've done. So intonation on a guitar is very, very important to set up. Again, that's part of the spa service that Bath Place Music do here on guitars, so we always check that.
Which is the point to say, that the first conversations I have with students about intonation is I've checked my tuning, it's definitely in tune. Well, that just means that the open strings are in tune, and if you're playing in that 7th fret position and it sounds awful, that's an intonation thing. And don't try and do truss rod adjustments or bridge adjustments yourself, because you're going to get further away inevitably. What Darcey won't tell you is that he does all of my guitars, and there are quite a few, and they come in from time to time because they see 40 hours of work per week, and these things naturally move, like you say, change the temperature and weather. And if I've done gigs I've been teaching in some cold room, then it'll go out a little bit, and it's easily fixed by somebody that knows what they're doing and doing it every day.
And the other thing to bear in mind with intonation, again, when we go back to this business about buying a guitar that's hard for somebody to play, if the nut is set too high, so the strings are sitting too high, that will also knock out the intonation, particularly on ukuleles, I've noticed. On ukes that can be quite bad. So it really is important that the nut is actually cut to the correct height. And again, generally with cheaper sort of classical guitars, student guitars, that a lot of people will go to just to find out if they're going to do it or not, usually find that the nut's not cut exactly as it should be. And again, if it's too high, it makes it very difficult to play those first chords that you so long to learn to play. Those first 3 chords that you can learn 100 songs with. If it's too tight here, you're not going to get anywhere with it.
I think it's one of those things. Anybody that's seen other videos that we've done know that I'm a big fan of sort of handmade acoustics in particular. And when you're paying somebody for their man hours to check that everything is perfect and they're using the best quality materials, then you get something that's really easy to play. And you can get that out of a less expensive instrument when it's been properly set up. But the first thing that goes, because they're making lots in a day in factory, is little fit and finish things. So you deal with things like rough fret edges and things occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing with rough fret edges is in some cases the actual fretboard can actually shrink. Because the grain runs this line, the grain can shrink, or even the softer wood outside of the grain can actually shrink. And of course the frets are made of metal, so they don't shrink. The wood goes, but the frets don't. And sometimes you get frets pop as well, and that will leave sharp edges on there. So yeah, we deal with all that sort of thing as well on there.
So I think as a final point for today, you mentioned frets. Do you want to take us through fretwear as well? Because I'm wearing through sets of frets fairly quickly.
Okay, so your frets are your point of where you will get the note out of each individual string. What you'll find is the more you play in a specific area, the more fretwear you'll get. And that will actually come out as little divots in the frets. And of course what happens is, as the divots get gradually shallower as you go up through the fretboard, so effectively you'll get more wear, say, on the 1st fret than you will on the 3rd fret. Eventually what tends to happen is, as those divots become deeper and you play that note, you'll find that then it rattles on the next string or the next fret up and so forth, and this happens. So that's critical that those frets are all relatively level all the way down through. Very, very important that. And again, they can in some cases have some effect on the intonation of the instrument. Not so much that you know it's by ear, but if you was to pitch it up on a tuner, you'd see that it does knock it out a little bit. So definitely, but the frets do, particularly the edges of the fretboard. Again, these are things that aid the sort of the comfort of playing the instrument. So you don't want to go up for a big note up here and then slice your fingers. And again, we see this a lot with unbranded guitars, for example, where they just don't quite finish the edges off. But I've seen guitars where the fretboard shrunk. It's been built absolutely perfectly in the factory. It's shrunk, and you end up with sharp edges down the side. So again, another good reason not to leave your guitar, as Harrison said, in a conservatory in bright sunlight, because that will cause the oil to dry out from the fretboard, and then it will squeeze together.
And from my experience, you see the guitars that I'm using day in, day out every couple of years, because they just need those divots in the frets polished out, and then they come back feeling like a new guitar. And we won't discuss taking the frets out and replacing them, because that's something for vintage guitar enthusiasts and not going to happen on a new instrument. But I think, firstly, thank you for giving up your time, but secondly, I think if we've got anything out of today, it's that they are more fragile and more adjustable and more delicate than perhaps a lot of people realise, and most stuff I think can be fixed. I've seen you deal with fairly serious looking headstock replacements and repairs. And things. But there are things that you can't see with the naked eye that need to be fixed to make it an enjoyable experience to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm all for everybody actually sort of having a go at doing things for themselves, but if you get the setup wrong or making adjustments incorrectly on your guitar, you can knock it out and make it even worse than what it was in the first place, and in some cases you can ruin the instrument. So that's why we offer that service.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that you see all of my instruments as well is, like you say, there almost seems a competition with some luthiers and guitar repair specialists to see how low they can get the action in terms of measurement. But as a player that doesn't have that experience, it just doesn't feel quite right.
Incidentally, I don't measure. When you've been doing it as long as I have, you naturally know how a guitar should feel. If it don't feel right, you put it right, basically. Very rarely that I use any kind of measurement. For intonation, I'll get the reference, obviously, with measuring, and on rare occasions I might use a ruler for height, but a lot of it's all about how the guitar feels, in my opinion. If you visualise how the neck should look, how the bridge should look, just by feel you should be able to set a guitar up to be absolutely spot on.
So you do this for anyone that walks in as part of your guitar spa?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just setups with the guitar, particularly with electrics. We make sure all the electronics are working, clean any pots, dirty selector switches, and sockets, etc. And if we find anything that's beyond it, we'll usually contact the customer and explain, you've got to have this replaced on there. But in most cases, we can do absolutely everything on that spa service without having to do much else.
So it is like service and MOT?
That's basically what it is, yes. Yeah,
Final point. I've just been doing in another video talking about why supporting local guitar shops versus buying a guitar unseen online is a really important thing. Everything in the shop has been checked over by you to make sure that every note sounds and that the action's playable and all of those things as well.
It's not just that, it's also the fact that if you're buying your guitar from a shop and they have the facilities like we have here at Bath Place Music and myself to actually make sure the guitar you buy is spot on. Even if you took one down off the rack in here and you said, do you know what, if the action was just a little bit lower, I would like that guitar, we would do that. If a guitar turns up from a supplier, it could even be an American Fender guitar, sometimes they're still not absolutely perfect, and we will always check those over. So you leave with a guitar that actually you're satisfied with, because I wouldn't be satisfied if you left me with a guitar
and
that you weren't satisfied with.
I'm holding a USA Fender Strat that on paper is identical to my Sunburst one at home, and it feels a little bit different because of the strings and the setup and things. And I think it's probably set up to an average so that anybody testing it out can make a decision about it. But if I was buying that today, it wouldn't leave the shop until it was set up to how.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I would. Last thing I want to do is walk into a shop and buy a guitar with a pig eye action on it, because again, if the action's high, it knocks everything out. Intonation's wrong. It's painful to play. So you just make sure the guitar is spot on before a customer takes it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Darcey.
No worries, thank you.
Bath Place Music, if you are local to Taunton, and if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below and look out for more videos that we do.